It's become more expensive to be overstocked, is the point. If silage was available at 10 cent a kilo or 12 cent a kilo cash cost, the overstocking issue is not as big a deal for the economics of the farm, if you get me. So really what we're saying now is the hole is there, but it's a more expensive hole to fill. That's when the economics of being overstocked become quite tricky, actually. The feed cost deficits are now, much more expensive to fill than they used to be.
Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. After a decade of expansion in the Irish dairy sector, Joe Patton and Richie O'Brien join us to reflect on the progress made, but notwithstanding concerns around areas such as the economics of overstocking milking platforms. But first, Richie takes us back to the time of pre-quota abolition.
Even going back further, I was recently at a conference for the 50 years of our membership of the EEC at the time in EU. And if you look at the change and what has happened within a 50-year period, I think the one figure that stood out to me from that conference was where milk yield has increased by 60% over that time. And that's the hard work and research and advisory that has gone on in that period that has brought that. And there's always been change. We've had, over that period, we've had oil crisis, we've had foot and mouth, we've had BSE, and there's always been challenges there. And if you go back, I suppose you asked there about the last 10 years. When I started on the Monitor Farm program in 2011, it was, the whole talk then was about the abolition of quotas and where farmers had been hindered, and farmers of my age, when they started farming, were hindered by quotas and very good operators. And this was really a great opportunity for farmers to expand. And the part of the Teagasc Glanbia joint program at the time, now Tirlán, was we had 11 monitor farmers and preparing those farmers for the abolition of quotas. So that was 2011, 2015, that period. And the messages back then and the messages today haven't changed. And if I look at, driving the genetics, increasing the EBI of the herds, increasing the EBI of the younger stock, that we had better bred stock coming into our herds post-quota to produce more milk. The whole story about grass, producing more grass, and soil fertility, getting the soil fertility right, that we could produce more grass from our own resources. And the whole area then of financial analysis of farms, as we were getting into this expansion phase, with Glanbia at the time or Tirlán now, we would have run a lot of financial courses, how we were going to prepare financially for this big expansion. So those big things, and if I look over the 10 years, the big one that always stands out to me is that improvement of genetics that stood to farmers in that time and will stand to farmers in the future. That milk yield coming from genetics, calving date, rather than feed, and the big feed one, 30% comes from the feed, 70% comes from genetics and calving date. So, and the feed really is the grass-based system. And that's still going to be out there for the future.
And if we think about it, to you, Joe, since 2011, I guess at that point we were talking about Food Harvest 2020, and it was this really big, ambitious target in terms of growing our milk production. And it was achieved, in a lot of situations on farm through efficient practices and I guess some inefficiencies. I mean, talk through that in terms of what you've observed.
Like Richie was saying there, I mean, the trajectory of this, it's important to take a long-term view on it. I mean, we had a huge uptick in and a huge upturn in milk production, obviously since sort of 13, 14, as people ramped up and pushed through the date of abolition of quota. And I suppose that was highly planned for, it was highly predicted, and even that you could say that the reality exceeded what the prediction or the expectation was really in terms of output. And for the most part, I think it's fair to say that for the most part that has been beneficial for the industry as a whole, in terms of, we use the word sustainability a lot, but the economic sustainability and social sustainability of dairy farms now is in a better place than it was. And that with the narrative that's there now, maybe, and the way people talk of late about the challenges that are coming to dairy farms, we could easily forget that, that, the income and the capacity and the technology and maybe labor efficiency on farms has actually improved. Not on every farm, certainly not on every farm. And some farms have been possibly might feel that they've been left behind in terms of some of this, and some farms have really benefited from it. But maybe back to Richie's point, the things that were said at the time that would make a difference, and funny, I happen to be just looking back on some of the stuff that we did recently from the Lakeland Joint Programme back in 2012-13. It was about, grass genetics, getting the infrastructure right, and keeping an eye on borrowings and debt. The people that follow those ideas, they've come out the right side of it, I would say, for sure. But look at it hasn't been, and I think maybe an important point on this, it hasn't been, the plan was never to say that Ireland has to grow its milk production for the sake of growing its milk production. It was to grow its milk production in a profitable way that could be sustained. And, we've been making this point a bit lately, I suppose, too, on other platforms that, we have had a situation on some farms where our advice has been that the additional 300,000 litres or 200,000 litres or whatever that was being planned wasn't likely to increase the profit and the sustainability of the farm. And in cases like that, the advice has been to step back and temper your ambitions until you can get everything right. So, of course, increased milk production has improved the situation on a lot of farms, but not in and of itself, I suppose, is the point. It had to come in the right way, and the right way is the things that we've discussed, like the grass, the genetics, and getting the labour and the infrastructure right.
Just to add to that, we always talked about in with monitor farms and all the farm walks we've had in the last 10 years is efficiency before scale. And that's still the banter I would use at talking to farmers is that it's efficiency before scale. And I was just looking at a simple figure we've used, and I've used for over the years as 5. If a cow is getting 800 kilos a meal, you need to grow 5.5 tons per cow. And with the banding and all that, that figure now has changed the overall level that you need to grow. So that was around 15 tons. So, but if you look at the banding figure of 220 and at the middle band, that's around 13 tons. And I suppose the challenge out there is on a whole farm, for every acre, every hectare you have on your farm, are you growing 13 tons? And I doubt a lot of farms are growing that. And as a simple feed budget, to me, that was always the figure, and it will be the figure, are you growing the grass to feed the stocking rate you have? Like, people are looking at other issues and nitrates come in, there's other challenges come in. But if you look at before all these challenges came in the last couple of years, or they're always there, but maybe more highlighted, are you growing enough grass to sustain the stocking rate you have? And is it financially sustainable then at that stage?
And let's, I suppose, go down that route a little bit further, because I was going to pick up on it anyway. You'd mentioned, this grass-based system that we have, Richie. But, you're talking about 5.5 tons of grass grown per cow. And I suppose if we're really blunt about it, there aren't enough farmers who can tell you exactly how much they're growing. And, it's milking platform and the whole farm stocking rate when you talk about every acre. But, to you, Joe, for farmers who don't have the answer to that, obviously, the obvious thing is measure grass. But I suppose look at that farmer who's stocked at 2.5 cows per hectare, and they're maybe growing 11, 12 tons of grass consistently. Where are you at in terms of how much of that 2.5 cows per hectare is being fed from homegrown feed, and how many cows are you feeding from supplement purchased into the farm?
It's a good question, Emma-Louise. And, I think we have to have this discussion, that very discussion. Maybe some of the issues in terms of changes to legislation is bringing this conversation to the surface now. But I would say that conversation and those calculations have to be had independent almost of the issue of, nitrates limits, because that's fundamentally a question of the economic balance for the farm, if you get me. That question should be answered first and foremost anyway. So like what has happened really, and maybe I know Richie, you mentioned about, this efficiency before scale, but unfortunately, and we're all probably, we might all be guilty of this somehow, scale is more exciting, or at least was more exciting at the time. Like, we've seen this so many times over the years where you go out onto a farm, maybe a new entrant or someone that wants to increase their herd size, Emma-Louise, and you try to talk about soil fertility, getting the grass right, and talk about the cow type and all the rest of it, where a lot of the time the initial point of contact was always around where does the parlour go, how many units, and what size of a shed or whatever it might be. So, and that's not been dismissive in any way. That's just the reality. The natural thing is to talk about the number of cows first and worry about the efficiency after. And that's just probably human nature, really. But anyway, back to the question. So what are they getting? So 2.5 stocked and maybe grown 11 tons. In that situations, what the answer to that has always been, and how that evolved over time, maybe if people had ramped up stocking rate, was what happened really was that obviously what used to be cut for silage on the grazing block is not cut for silage any longer. More and more of that area is required for grazing through the year, and suddenly there's a hole in the feed budget, and the hole in that feed budget is a silage issue. So the error, if you like, or the imbalance in the system is manifested in the silage pit, really. So that's why you're tight for silage. Rent and ground was always the solution there on conacre and all the rest of it. But as the costs of the cost of fertilizer, the cost of rental land, the cost of contractor and fuel, etc., has gone up, we're now seeing that, it's not uncommon to do the sums on silage, and it's costing over 220, 240 euros a ton dry matter, which is what we used to be paying 10 years ago for concentrate, Richie.
Yeah.
So your winter feed now, it's become more expensive to be overstocked, Emma-Louise, is the point. Okay, so like if silage was available at 10 cent a kilo or 12 cent a kilo cash cost, the overstocking issue is not as big a deal for the economics of the farm, if you get me. So really what we're saying now is the hole is there, but it's a more expensive hole to fill. And that's when the economics of being overstocked become quite tricky, actually. The feed cost deficits are now much more expensive to fill than they used to be. And that becomes an issue that people have to be really key. So a short answer to follow, or a short point on that, if you're stocked, or if it's 5.5 ton and you're stocked at 2.5, like 2.5, you need close to 15 tons grown. If you're grown 11, you're 4 ton per hectare short, which is 4 ton per hectare on a 50 hectare block that's about 200 tons, which is 1,000 ton of silage. That's a big hole.
And I suppose if you're looking at it in pure terms, 4 ton is almost your grass allocation for one cow.
Yeah. You're almost at 11 ton grown, two cows per hectare whole farm is where it's at. And maybe just one final point, not to labour it, but we've talked a lot to people lately about maybe that have issues with nitrates or whatever, and they've been buying silage on the stem and maybe doing that kind of stuff. When you add up the area that they need of silage external to the land block, and if you factor that into the stocking rate calculations, a lot of farms end up coming out at about 2.1 effective stocking rate.
If we put it back to you, Richie, you've put numbers on it that, that suppose target that you would have looked at of maybe the 15 tons, 5.5 tons of grass grown and 800 kilos of meal. I suppose that's a very standard figure for meal per cow, presently. I suppose, what is the system, the most fit for purpose system you would see for an Irish farmer? I mean, if we take a step back, if there was one best system, we'd all be doing the same thing and there'd be a standard blueprint we'd all follow. But in your opinion, what is the best system?
Well, the best system is exactly what we're talking about there for the last while. Match your stocking rate to the grass grown. And if you look at the new banding system there now, just take the middle band, your stocking rate is going to be somewhere around 2.3, 2.4, doing well, growing 13 tons of grass. Now, if you're not growing that level of grass, then you have to come down from that level. And producing, I can't emphasize this enough, is that genetic potential of the animals. And if I look at herds that are producing up to 600 kilograms of milk solids, mainly through grass, and through genetics and compact calving dates. That's the system that we'd need to be looking at. Like there's a lot of herds out there now. I go back to that group where I dealt with in 2011. Like their average milk solids at this stage are up at 550 kilograms of milk solids per cow, and mainly through grass, about 800 kilograms a meal, and profitable systems. The other one there is if you look at the feed costs, how feed costs, those direct feed costs. I know Pat Gowing uses feed, fertilizer, and contractor as the direct feed costs associated, but like they're up around 40 to 44% of overall costs now. Like when I go back to that 2011 period, they were around 30% of overall costs. And, you know, if you look at those three costs, feed, fertilizer, and contractor, like if they're starting to hit, and if you just look at those alone, if they're starting to hit over 50% of overall cost, then you have to look at the system and say, what exactly is wrong with my system? Is there too much inputs? Is there something gone wrong? Is there too many moving parts? From the time the cow goes out to graze the grass or get milk into the tank, is there too many moving parts? Is there too much machines involved to get that milk into the tank? And you have to look at that system. I can't overemphasize again, the other side of this is the financial analysis. Like you asked Emma-Louise about the system, and people, that's a very simple system, 800 kilos of meat, 550, about 2.3 stocking rate, grass-based, very, very few moving parts to get that. But a lot of people then have, different versions of that. But you look at that, you need to analyze exactly what you're at and financially analyze what you're at. For yourself, be that through Teagasc with Profit Monitor or cost control planners or talking to your accountant. And they were the challenges back then, back in 10 years ago when we were getting in abolition of quotas. The challenges now are different, but we still need to analyze that and do a financial analysis of the farm. And people come into us here in Kilkenny and Waterford and they're talking about, the challenges and giving out about regulations and that. I accept the frustration where farmers have worked extremely hard and to build their businesses to a very large degree. And in fairness, they've taken this challenge. And in fairness to that, they worked very hard there and now they feel a bit disgruntled because of the new regulations. But maybe that's, as I said, over a 50-year period, there's always been problems. There's always been issues out there. So maybe it's a time now to step back and just look at the farm business, doing a financial analysis of your farm business. Where am I at? Where am I going in the next number of years with the new challenges out there? And they are challenges. Let's just call a spade a spade. These are challenges on every farm there. They're going to curtail. Stocking rate is going to be curtailed. And what effect does that have on my farm? Is it for the worse? Is it for the better? And there will be a mixture of those out there.
To you, Joe, I mean, you've both mentioned, say, the cow genetics. Richie mentions that there are some farmers who are, I guess, seasoned, they're well established, maybe consolidated in terms of cow numbers and the stage their herd is at. But maybe 2 or 3 key focus areas where farmers are winning and losing and achieving that 550 kilos of milk solids type production.
One of the things, Emma-Louise, on that, I think, I often said this, that somebody who started into milk, a new entrant in 2017, 18, 19, it was the best time ever to start into milk production because a lot of the heavy lifting had been done on the genetics by other people. So if you went out at that stage and bought correctly, and we've often seen this, and maybe Rich, you might comment too, that people that started into milk for the first time, if they made one good decision of buying the right genetics, they leapfrogged the national average by a long way. And suddenly, and it's not uncommon to see that the best performing farms now have only been milking cows less than 10 years. And that's a great thing to see. It could be a frustrating thing to see if you've been, if you've been milking for 30 years and suddenly somebody down the road from you comes in and they're coming way ahead of you and they're only in the job 5 years. The reason for it is the genetics that was this. The only trick there was the leapfrog in genetics. So I wouldn't be disgruntled about that. I would be looking at if that was my situation, you'd be saying, well, learn a lesson from that and see that there's something in this thing from a genetics point of view, that somebody that never milked cows before can suddenly be top of the pops for solids and a fertility and a cell count point of view through genetics, which is it's a big learning. I think we learned an awful lot about the capacity of cows by that. That's a big one. A second one, Emma-Louise, in terms of just this, I know Richie alluded to it there around the stocking rate question. It has been said to us a lot, and I think more people need to be doing financial analysis of their own system. We have 1,300 profit monitors done a year. You'd like to see more than that, because you get to learn an awful lot about your own farm by looking at your own figures, and they're for yourself, really. But one of the common things that has come back to us, like over the last couple of years, is my feed cost has gone from sort of 4 cent a litre up to 8 cent a litre. And I don't feel that I'm really farming any different. I think I'm getting better at grass, but my feed cost has gone from 4 cent to 8 or 9 cent a litre. How is that possible? Right. And like a big part of that is that the stocking rate question, that we've breached the stocking rate limit from a feed efficiency point of view. And now we're buying more silage, possibly more maize silage, more grass silage, and more concentrate as well. The cows that are on the overstocked element, the individual cow, if you added it up, their feed cost could be 25, 26 cent a litre for feed alone for these extra animals, which sounds outrageous. But if you count it up, we're buying in, Richie, aren't we? We're buying in 5.5 ton of forage effectively for that animal,
exactly, yeah.
which is 12 or 1,300 euros a cow. And you put another bit of concentrate on top of it, you're up to 17 and 1,800 euros a cow. Dividing that across your sort of average production, it brings the cost of feed for the extra cows could be up as 25, 26 cent a litre. So if you have enough of them in the herd, Emma-Louise, you end up that your feed cost suddenly goes from 4 cent up to 8 or 9 cents and you don't feel that you've changed numbers that much, but 20% cow numbers would do that to you. So recognizing that from a cost perspective, there's no point in arguing, or no point in trying to say that I want to have a very, very low cost system if the system is overstocked. It's impossible to do it, right? So we have seen your point about the performance question. We've seen it on a couple of farms. I know it has been mentioned this year on the podcast a few times, but it needs to be said again, that removing the passenger animals from the herd creates space and creates opportunity for the remaining cows in the herd, that we get to the point where we're optimally stocked. You could add 20 kilos of solids per cow by getting rid of the passengers. So this is not about it's not about reducing herd size or about dropping production. It's really about matching the cow numbers to what the farm is capable of carrying. And when that happens, I think performance per cow and per hectare can be protected. The other final one I would say, and it's one that we've seen a lot on herds over the years, the effect that the management of fertility can have is massive. So we always have a situation maybe in farms where we start out trying to make changes, that we have a long calving interval and maybe 15, 16, 18, 20% of the herd empty year on year. In a way, it feels like we should continue with that to hold the herd together. But oftentimes, putting in strict criteria and strict rules around fertility, that if you end up with 20% empty in a year, that they're actually culled and replaced with a better genetic potential heifer. It's painful in the short term, but I'd say over a 4 or 5 year period, it pays off in a big way.
A lot of our discussion today forms some of the basis to I suppose, tackle the challenges that we've documented and look at how we can build our own farm systems and become more resilient to ongoing challenges and new challenges that will come down the line. The dairy conference will take place on Wednesday, the 29th of November at the Lyrath in Kilkenny. Can you give us a brief insight into what we can expect to see on the day?
Really, Emma-Louise, and it's something we're very keen and conscious of, is it's really we want it to be a day or a positive day for people that are actually in the business of milking cows. So the farmer audience is critically important to us. It's really where we want to get to. So, like, look, at conferences can be a long day for everybody, really, and maybe for some of our audience that might be used to doing other types of work. They might say, "Gee, I'm not sitting for the whole day listening to presentation after presentation." So to take that in mind, we have sort of split it up a bit, that we do have sort of two strong presentations, or two strong areas in the morning, which is on that area of costs. And we have David Becca from Red Sky Agri in Australia, a consultant. So David's coming over to give his perspective on just that question of, costs in pasture-based systems from South America, from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and in Ireland as well. So that'll be an interesting discussion around that whole thing we're after talking about, how costs can accelerate depending on the balance of stocking rate and feed in a system. That's a strong part of the morning. The labour challenges on dairy farms, we have a session on that too. So that'll be led with Marion Beecher. We'll lead off with some of the new research work there. Brendan Joyce and John Whelan, two dairy farmers, will join us for that. So they have very strong perspectives on how to get the best out of labour on farms. So the farmer voice, very important in that session as well. That's the morning session. I suppose I should mention also, obviously, that our conference will be opened by the minister. So Minister McConalogue will come along to open the event and give just a perspective maybe into the longer term as a starting point for the conference, which would be very interesting to hear. So I mentioned about maybe not killing people with too many presentations, and to keep that in mind, the afternoon session, Emma-Louise, we're breaking for a series of workshops. We have interactive workshops at that point where the crowd will break into smaller groups and maybe go to more of a discussion, sort of Q&A type situation. So we have 6 workshops, and people can choose 3 of them. So the workshops would be on your grazing tactics, so how to get your grazing right for spring 24. Brendan Horn will lead off on that one. A cell count of 100 in the first 100 days. So Pablo Silva and Don Crowley will present on that one. This is not just on selective dry cow, but more so on just the management post calving and what can be done at that point. The whole question of nitrogen weighs heavy on people's minds. So David Wall and Mike Egan will give some tips and some ideas around getting the most out of your nitrogen. That's another workshop. We have a stocking rate workshop with Michael O'Donovan, Pat Moylan, and Donald Patton is in that one. So that whole question again about blocks and how you put those in, that's number 4. 10 times a week milking, maybe back to Richie's points on labour. Can we get away with, or can we build a system where we milk 10 times a week, so there's 4 evenings a week where there's no milking? Not for everybody, but for a lot of people under pressure with labour, it's an option, and we want to have a good discussion on that. So Aidan Ahern, a dairy farmer in Waterford, will join us for that one with Emer Kennedy and Martina Gormley. And finally then, just on slurry storage and slurry handling, slurry treatments, additives, the scale of storage required, Pat Toohey and William Burchell will present on that. There's a lot in all that, Emma-Louise. There's 6 of them there. You'll be picking 3. Hopefully, people will be grumbling about that they didn't get to the other 3. That would be a sign of success as far as I'm concerned. And we're hoping for a good discussion. And so, if there's something on your mind, or there's a question that you feel, or an opinion you want voiced on any of those issues, we'd be happy to see you come along and get involved in the debate. So there's a nice bit in that. So it is, as I said, it's the 29th in the Lyrat. So kicking off from about 9:15 for registration, and then we'll be hoping to have the minister beginning his address at around 9:45 or so, and the day will take care of itself after that, and we'll give you the dinner as well. So the booking in, obviously, then Richie's on the website, isn't it? So the details on that is up on the website, on the Teagasc website. So there are links going around for that. So we'd encourage people to take a look through the link, and just book in online is the easiest way to do it.
At this point, we are, I suppose, 2 weeks away, and particularly important for the afternoon sessions. The morning will be common with the presentations, but for the afternoon workshops, I mean, make sure that you're into the workshop that you want to get to. I suppose registration is important. All roads lead to Kilkenny, Richie, so we'll leave the final word to you.
Yeah, no, everybody will be very, very welcome to Kilkenny on the 29th, and I think it's a great opportunity for discussion groups and groups to get together. There's lots of information. I think Joe's gone through the workshops. I think that format works extremely well for people to interact with the speakers. There's 2 sessions in the morning, but also to look at this as a social day out. It's a chance to catch up with other farmers right across the country on the day, have the chat. There's dinner time, there's going to be loads of tea time, and during the workshops, there'll be chances to have that chat with people. So that whole social thing as well. And I would encourage discussion groups to take this opportunity to come to Kilkenny, even stay the night before or stay the night after, and take the opportunity as your discussion group break away in the back end of the year, and not for people to forget that they're coming to the real home of hurling, Emma-Louise, especially for you, for a couple of days.
I'll refrain from a comment on that, Richie, but we're looking forward to it. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Richie.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Richie O'Brien and Joe Patton for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review, and listen on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.